Hey guys, I am Game Advisor, and today we'll be covering 10 things that I wish I knew when I started Dark and Darker. These tips will help you get into the game, and they will also make sure that you don't make some of the biggest mistakes possible. So with that being said, let's jump right into the video. Now these first couple of tips are going to be related to portals, and the first one is don't be afraid to wait and steal a blue portal rather than fighting all three of your opponents or waiting and skipping one and letting your opponent take it just to go ahead and have to find another which may or may not appear. Now the reason this is important is because you can get queued into games as a 1v3 or maybe your team's died, whatever, or you're the last one that needs to still extract and you want to get out of the game. Sometimes you're better off letting your opponent open that portal and then immediately running to it and taking it if they haven't seen you yet. This actually can work out super well and save you a ton of times, but either way, it's something you want to be aware of because you can choose to skip it and try to go find a down portal, which are the red ones by the way, but if you do decide to do that, you're going to be risking possibly not even getting a portal and then dying to the zone. Second is that you don't want to get greedy and skip portals, as it's always better to get out with something rather than nothing, and this mostly applies to early on in the game. What we mean by this is not necessarily that you can't skip portals, of course it's always going to be up to you and what you want to do, but when you're first learning the game, if you see a blue portal, I highly recommend that you just take it. Stop what you're doing, maybe loot a chest right next to it or something, and then get out. It's not worth risking all the gear you have, all the loot you've gained, and all the other things that you got in your inventory, because when you're first starting out in the game, that early on currency that you're going to gain from that run, even if it's a small amount, is incredibly impactful when it comes to your later runs. Speaking of which, that brings us to our third tip, which is try to loot a lot of jewelry in your early games, as this will set you up to be able to afford potions, bandages, and some decent starting gear for every single game you go into, giving you that little bit of an advantage. Now, again, this is really just telling you what you want to focus on looting. We're not telling you necessarily to skip everything else. We're just saying when it comes to inventory space, if you're starting to get full, you probably want to go ahead and focus on picking up cracked jewelry or any other rarity of jewelry for that matter, and then bringing it out with you. The worst and smallest pieces of jewelry will still get you 6 gold, which is about the same as just about any other piece of equipment of the same tier. So unless you're finding like blue or purple tier gear, you're better off just taking jewelry, taking it out, and then selling it to the vendor in order to make some money. Fourth on our list is that you want to be using the trade chat in order to sell and auction off your items. You would probably be surprised as to how much a single blue or purple item can go for early on in the game. This is why you always want to be on the lookout for those items even if they don't apply to your tier, and make sure that you bring them out of the game, as you can sell them for sometimes upwards of 400 or 500 gold, maybe even pushing 1,000 just depending on how good the stats rolled on it, because if you do roll perfect stats on something like a longbow for the ranger, which is the most popular class, then you're likely going to be able to get a huge price tag on that item. Alrighty, we're halfway there with number 5, and this one is the biggest noob mistake you could possibly make in Dark and Darker. And it works perfect with the last 2 tips we just gave you, and that's the fact that you don't want to ever forget to move your inventory to your stash, or your storage, or your chest, whatever you want to call it. The reason this is because when you sell something in this game, whether it be to a vendor or to a player, the game will automatically default put it into your inventory, not your storage's inventory. So what you want to do is just make sure you move all that gold over before you get stuck in a situation where you now started a run with all the money that you just made on your previous one, or all the gold you just earned from selling an item on the trade chat. I've personally made this mistake, and pretty much everybody I know that's played Dark and Darker, experienced or not, with the little bit of time we've had with the game, has also made this mistake as well. So do yourself a favor and always double check before you agree to start a run that you don't have any gold or anything of value that you do not want to take with you into that run. Number 6 is the fact that if you're solo, you want to do your best to avoid fighting any elite mobs such as the Wraiths or the Skeletal Champions. If you don't know what Skeletal Champions are, they're the skeletons that got like the barbarian looking helmets or the Viking helmets and the shield, and they're like crouched down. Either way, just avoid these guys when you're solo and still learning the game. They're extremely difficult to handle early on when you don't know their attack patterns, and I can almost guarantee you your first few times you try to fight them solo, you are going to die. But if you are a class like a ranger, sometimes you can get away with it if you're willing to kite them, but they do have a lot of move speed and they take a lot of damage to burn through, which is why I usually only recommend players go after these guys if you're in a group of 3 and there are no enemy players anywhere nearby. Number 7 is actually a tip that most people are just not thinking about, and that's the fact that your weapon is the most important piece of gear on your loadout. So if you have to make a choice between choosing, say, a blue or epic weapon, or taking in all green armor, if I were you, I would highly recommend that you always go for that blue or epic weapon. That extra 5, 10, or even 20 damage depending on the weapon itself and the stat bonuses it gives is almost always going to be more valuable than some slightly better armor. This is even more applicable if you're playing something like the Ranger, who doesn't usually get into melee range in the first place, so this will help you deal extra damage in order to push through enemies quicker. Following that is a tip that you really just have to experience for yourself and will come with time, but you can try to start doing it early on, and that's that you want to start learning enemy NPC attack patterns and the attack patterns of player character weapons. This is super important to combat, as more often than not, if you are knowledgeable about the attack pattern of, say, a skeletal footman, and you know what their animations look like right before a swing and how much downtime there is between those swings, then you'll know that you can go in and hit them at certain periods of time. You'll see plenty of times that people will kind of do this weave in and out style of combat for melee, and that's a great thing to do. You just want to make sure that you're only weaving out when the enemy is actually preparing to strike and you've baited out that attack. Again, every NPC in the game has its own set attack pattern, and you do need to learn these if you want to be able to survive against them with even some of the worst armor, as all the damage they do is completely avoidable if you know what you're doing. When it comes to player weapons, that's a lot harder to learn, and that one will come mostly with time, but there's a lot of weapons that always swing vertically and have pretty long delays like the Barbarian's weapons usually do, unless they're using the Felling Axe, so you can really start to learn how to weave in and out of combat with, say, a Barbarian, or when you could even try to, say, duck an attack if they're using a horizontal swing with something like the Maul. Next up is that you want to always try to pop health potions and shield potions right before you go into combat, as it can give you that small bit of an edge that you need in order to win. These are widely doubted in their use, but I cannot tell you enough how powerful these can be. Simply having those running before you enter combat rather than popping them during combat will save you more often than you think it will, and if you're using higher tier ones, this is even more amplified. In fact, you can use lower tier health potions with medium and higher tier health potions in order to kind of stack them. This does not work with shield potions, but this does work with your health potions, so you could go into combat with 2 or even 3 health potions running all at the same time. Again, they do have to be different tiers for this to work, and this might be patched out, but if it's not, take advantage of it and give yourself that edge. Now, our last tip today is probably the most useful one you could take away from this entire video, and that's that headshots matter, and they matter a lot. I can't tell you the exact percentage multiplier, but what I can tell you is that hitting someone in the head, whether it be player or an NPC, will give you a drastic increase in the amount of damage caused, whether it be with a melee weapon, a ranged weapon, or a spell. You always want to aim for the head, of course, with there being a few obvious exceptions, such as using Fireball on Mage or a Molotov or something like that. You'll always want to be aiming for that head. Whether it be a PvE mob or a player you're going up against, aiming for the head will win fights, and that means that you win more loot, you get more experience, and you extract alive. With all that being said, I want to give a big shout out to our Platinum and Above channel members, which currently include Jonathan S., Caustic FPV, Gerald G, and Jim Phillips. Thank you all so much for watching, and if you want to become a channel member, just click the join button down below. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.